Welcome to what we believe to be our 16th Fireside Chat, although Brenda says it's the 17th. For those of you who've been before, you've heard the spiel. For those who haven't, this is organised by the Jewish Historical Society of Hong Kong. We arrange a number of events and matters here in connected with the shul and connected with Jewish history in Hong Kong. The library, which contains a large amount of material that you wouldn't normally see, is supported by the JHS. The cemetery, Howard in particular, is very active in keeping up the cemetery as a source of our historical records. We publish occasional books and monographs, copies of which are available for sale outside, and we urge you to try and help us move some of that huge stock of the synagogue book and the S.J. Chan's excellent book about the Jews of Kaifeng, historically reliable, unlike so many things you hear about the Jews of Kaifeng elsewhere today. And there's some beautiful greetings cards of the shul that were produced with the aid of the trustees, again through the auspices of the Jewish Historical Society. However, the crowning jewel in our work is the series of Fireside Chats, and tonight Sharon and Michael Hartmann will be exploring a little bit of contemporary Jewish Hong Kong history. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. And welcome Mr. Justice Hartmann to the Fireside Chats. Now, there are some who would say being appointed to the High Court is enough, Dayenu. And there are others who would say non-permanent judge of the Court of Final Appeal, Dayenu, I've got there. And then even higher to become a trustee of the Synagogue Trust, for sure, Dayenu. But we in Hong Kong, and you, Michael, know that actually it's not Dayenu until you become interviewed on the Fireside Chat.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're delighted that you are here. Now, Michael, as many of you will know, is a man of many, many parts, not just an eminent judge, trustee, but husband to the lovely Melanie, father to Robin and David, and also a grandfather. Michael, your father was British of German origin and your mother Australian. How did they meet? Where did they meet?
They met in India during the war. My father was preparing to go to Burma. He was in the British Army, and my mother had joined the Australian Army because of the war. And they met, and they had one of these whirlwind war romances, and I was born in a military hospital in Mumbai.
So truly international, like many people.
Yes, yeah.
Did you stay in India for any length of time?
No, my father was quite badly wounded in Burma, and he was shipped out, and the family then went down to Australia. It's a sad fact that individually they were lovely people, but they didn't get on very well, and there was a separation quite early on, and my father went to England. But we joined him, there was a reconciliation, and we joined him there a little later. Yeah.
It was difficult growing up then in quite a sort of volatile home environment, and one that took you to various places over the world.
Yes, except for this, that my parents were hugely aware of the need not to hurt myself or my sister. And so we grew up in a home where we knew our parents didn't see eye to eye, but it didn't affect us, the truth be told. They were always very loving and kind and caring for us.
You, at 8 years of age, went to live in England, so that was the beginning of your English childhood, as it were. You enjoyed your time in England?
Yes, I think like most 8-year-olds. I mean, I'd come from Australia across to England, and in England in those days, I think it didn't matter what you knew, provided you had the right accent. And I arrived in England with this broad Aussie accent, and quite literally, my parents sent me off to a boarding school just so that I could learn to speak proper in an English way. And yeah, I enjoyed it. I did.
Your father was quite an intense man, and when you were 10 years of age, took you on a trip that many would have to wait until they were much older to cope with. Would you like to tell us a bit about that?
And that was to Germany. My father's family that had stayed in Germany were all lost in the Holocaust. And what was known of them was that a number had gone to Bergen-Belsen and had died there. And we had friends in Germany at that time, and my father took the opportunity to take me to Belsen. I was about 10 at the time. It was very, I don't know what it's like now. I can only talk about it then, and I'm talking about it from the perspective of a 10-year-old. So I just remember a very chilling kind of North Sea wind, and these mounds, which simply had plaques saying, "Here lie 2,000 bodies," or "Here lie 1,000 bodies." And the grass didn't seem to me to have grown fully yet. It's something I can actually still remember very vividly. And of course it gives you a very profound sense of belonging to a particular people. And that stayed with me very much for all of my life.
And just putting that in perspective, that would have been...
Talk louder, Sharon, darling.
Yes, and putting that in some perspective, that would have been some 10 or 12 years after the end of the Second World War, so something that was still very fresh and very raw in the mind of your own father in terms of the loss of so much of his own family.
Yes, it was, yeah. I mean, at that stage, no matter what, you still don't have a full understanding. And of course, for me, I was never, directly involved in anything. But it's quite something to stand there and think that there could be relatives, uncles, that there are, that their spirits are there somewhere. It's as I say, it's something that has never left me.
And at that age, can you remember any sense of being in any way connected to Judaism and the impact that all of that has? Or?
Well, my parents were completely secular, but my father was very aware of his Jewish heritage in that secular sense, and that was my first profound sense of it. Yeah.
You stayed in England until you were about 15 years of age, I believe, and then you travelled to South Africa.
Yes. My father was English, my mother was Australian. My mother hated England. My father hadn't particularly liked Australia, and they split the difference, quite literally. They had some friends, and so they went to South Africa. Our timing was great, because we arrived there just after Sharpeville. I stayed in South Africa for a year. We were in Johannesburg, but you had to do Afrikaans for matriculation then, and I was really suffering. I had to try and do that in a year or something, so they sent me back to England.
And you were then in England on your own?
I was in England on my own at boarding school.
Made you the fine fellow that you are today.
Absolutely, they made me the man I am. Yes. In those days, of course, you didn't have lots of telephone calls, and you didn't have half term and flying. So I got on a P&O Orient ship from Cape Town, the Pendennis Castle. I remember that, and I was there for 2 years until I finished my school. By then, they had moved up to southern Rhodesia, as it was, and I came out and joined them in southern Rhodesia.
So you came out at about 18 years of age in the early 60s. Was Rhodesia swinging in the same way that London was in the early 60s?
No. I just remember with Rhodesia, I arrived with long hair and being rather English, and a blazer. And I was told, get rid of the long hair because somebody's going to beat you up. It was very much a country of, it was, I would imagine it about like middle America. Lots of people driving around in trucks with very short hair, and and sort of bush boots on. Yeah, so it took quite a while to acclimatise.
You started university life in Rhodesia?
I did. Yeah, initially I wanted to be a journalist, and I was a journalist for about a year. I went to journalist school, and then I practiced as a journalist, and then I think I realised I wasn't actually going to be a really good journalist. And I had learned by then that in journalism you've got to be really good or you don't get anywhere, and I knew I wasn't as good as I wanted to be, so I went to university and did law. Yeah.
You were drawn to the arts, though, clearly, and at this early stage you started to become involved in both amateur dramatics and also writing plays.
I got involved in amateur dramatics because social life was good. I couldn't act for tuppence. But one thing about amateur dramatics, and it was actually good amateur dramatics there, we had a professional director, we had a lot of people who had been professional actors in England but had, for example, retired or married and come out to live there. So it was quite good. But you quickly learned that if you could get into Shakespeare, for example, they had so many people in the cast that the after-show parties were fabulous. You know? And for me, that was basically it. And I met Melanie there, but Melanie was a professional. Melanie had done dancing professionally in England and drama and stuff like that. I was just seventh soldier on the right, you know, in the chorus. Yeah.
Rumour has it that actually you met your lovely bride on a production of Fiddler on the Roof.
Oh no, Fiddler on the Roof, we were both married by then. And Melanie played one of the daughters. It was a big hit. Clive and Ketty were there. We had some very good people in it. They were not in the show, but I played the rabbi's son. And I had a little bit of singing to do, and then they cut that, and I had a little bit of talking to do. But it was a good show, yes.
Living in Rhodesia meant that you had to face the prospect of military service.
Yeah.
And I understand you started your military service in 1968, but a year earlier your military service could have started. Do you want to tell us a bit about that? I understand that you were a volunteer for the Six-Day War when that started.
Oh, no, that was just very much that sort of sudden moment of euphoria, you're quite right, when that happened. So, you know, it was one of the things I did and some other friends did, to go down and obviously put your name down to do whatever is necessary. And we were told, thank you very much indeed, but of course it was all over and done by the time the ink was dry on the volunteer papers. It was only to sort of do whatever could be done, you know, at that stage. Yeah.
But certainly launched you on this military career. In 1968 you started your military service. You were very much involved in what became known as the Bush War. What kind of rank did you get to? What sort of work were you doing in the army?
Well, everybody had to do it. I mean, Clive had to do it as well. Clive was in the intelligence, which they tend to make available to clever people. I was an infantryman, unfortunately, and I was sent to School of Infantry, which is their sort of officer training. And I did that. So I was in the bush for quite a while. When the war got more and more intense, I mean, at the end, we were, all of us, doing it, but 40 days in the army, and 20 days out, and 40 days in and 20 days out. So I was doing that for quite a long time.
Quite heavy pressure, certainly.
There was a lot of pressure on work, and it was pressure, funnily enough, on somebody like Melanie, because you're 40 days in, and you become acclimatized very much to an all-male military background, and you start talking normally in radio talk, you know. Nothing is yes, darling, that's a negative, darling. Or, you know, it's a Zulu Papa whiskey or something like that. And I used to find the difficulty was trying to change. Yes, of course, it's very difficult. You're in court on a Thursday and your call-up starts again on Friday, and suddenly you're in the bush on halfway through Friday morning with a rifle trudging around, you know, hoping you're not going to get shot at. Yeah.
Is it right that on one occasion you had to accompany the president of Rhodesia, Clifford DuPont, up to the front line? This sounds like a very, very...
I don't know, this was, yeah, my life's been punctuated by moments of idiocy. We all have it. And I remember the president, he was a little chap, we used to call him the mini-president. And he came to Kariba, which I happened to be up at the time, and they said, right, he's going to go and meet people, and we want you in the front jeep, and he'll be in the middle jeep, and then we'll have people behind. So I jumped into the front jeep and set off. And they didn't tell me where we were going, which is a minor problem in military matters. So using my brain, I said to myself, right, there's the wall, which is at the bottom, and then there are the offices, which are at the top. And that's where the staff will be, and that's who he's going to meet. Problem with going to university, you see, I sort of rationalized it. And so when we got near the offices, I turned right and went up to the offices. The rest of the convoy went straight down to the wall, so I was left up this side road trying to do a sort of 8-point turn to catch them up. Yeah. Yeah, my military was a bit like that. Yeah.
You didn't get any medals for navigation during the war?
No, not for anything, in fact. Yeah.
So luckily you pursued a legal career, one that you've been very, very successful in. But you were pursuing a legal career in a political and legal environment that was very, very uneasy. Did you find that you were soon specializing in any particular area of law?
Later we fused the two professions. Here in Hong Kong there's we have the solicitor's profession, and then we have the court specialists, and that was fused in Zimbabwe. But even before that I was a partner in a firm, Cantor & Inman, and I ended up doing most of the litigation work, most of the court work. Yeah.
And what sort of work did you find that you became involved with? Did you stay in strict litigation, or did you try and work
It was a small jurisdiction, so you did a bit of everything. You do a will, and then you'd go to court to represent somebody in a fraud case, and then you'd come back and do a subdivision. You know, it was pretty general. Yeah.
Your legal career then took a rather more sort of personally challenging direction when you started to do some work for Amnesty and working for political prisoners and political detainees. What happened at that stage? How did that come about?
Under the emergency regulations, political people who were considered now freedom fighters, and we considered them terrorists in those days, a lot of people would be arrested politically, and they had certain rights to make representations and appearances before boards, administrative boards, and Amnesty I used to represent, and they used to instruct me to appear for quite a few of these people. So ironically, because it was to help later quite a lot in my life, I became quite well known to a lot of the major political figures who were in detention at the time.
There was one incident that seemed to have shocked the country a good deal when a number of aircraft were blown up. What had happened, and what was your involvement in all of that?
I think that's one of those sort of pivotal moments, actually, in your life. What had happened was that, without becoming long and boring about it, is that Zimbabwe was assisting a guerrilla movement in Mozambique, and the South Africans were assisting the opposing movement in Mozambique. Zimbabwe was using Zimbabwe aircraft, and the South Africans, so later history showed, sent in an SAS team. And they destroyed about 14 or 15 fighter aircraft in Zimbabwe on the ground, including an entire squadron of new fighters from England. There was major hoo-ha, you can imagine. And what actually happened was they started to arrest a number of officers, very senior officers, on the basis that there must have been an internal cabal who had plotted this. I was asked to represent two of them. The real difficulties we had was trying to find them, because the police and the Central Intelligence Organization had them hidden out in the bush. And we made a number of applications to the courts for habeas corpus, and we were just denied. The state just denied us. It was getting quite a lot of publicity at the time. And then I received a phone call from a prison warder, who I, for some reason, must have known, but I don't remember now, who said, "Your two clients are here. They're going to be here till tomorrow. Come on over now, I can let you in." So I went across and saw them, and they were both in a very, very bad state.
Did you go alone, or were you accompanied
No,
by
I went on my own. They were in tears and they were hugging each other, and they said that they had denied everything, but they had been tortured by North Koreans. That there was a North Korean unit out there helping the 5th Brigade, and they showed me. They said we had electrodes put into our spines and our testicles, and they were able to show me. Of course, that didn't help particularly, because I'm not an expert medically. So I left them. I went up to university, and there was an expert in trauma there, a doctor. I brought him down. We went in, and he was my article clerk for the moment, and he was able to make a study and was able to say, yes, these are definitely marks of torture caused by electricity, electrodes implanted into the body. The great difficulty that we had was they were going to be moved again. We'd already had about 10 days trying to find them. Their terror was that they would disappear. They would be disappeared. And their terror also was that they had said and done a number of things in making statements under torture, which might implicate others who were innocent. For example, one of them had recited the names of South African presidents when asked who else was in the conspiracy. Literally, it came out later, in order, his memory from school of South African presidents. But, of course, what he realized was that a lot of the South African presidents had names which were very common, for those who may know Southern Africa, for ordinary people, Schmutz or de Villiers or something, you see. And they were terrified other people may be caught. And so they wanted it to be publicized. So I spoke to my partner, and I spoke to another lawyer who was representing another one of them, because by then there were about 8 of them, although I'd only seen the 2. And it was agreed that legally we could call a press conference. One of them, I think, got rather frightened and fell out, but my partner and I had a press conference. It was very, very tame, but we knew it would be fairly explosive, because although we didn't say anything, it was very legalese. You know, our clients acknowledge, and you know, the rule of law and all that sort of stuff. But you know, once it came out that we said they had been badly ill-treated and protested their innocence, I think we knew that the kite was up, as they would have said in the First World War, or the balloon is up. And of course it was all around the world the next day. I went into the office the next morning expecting it, really, I suppose, and of course the secret police were there. And they said they were taking me away for political detention. And you know, it's an odd situation. You know it may happen, but you have a job to do, so you do it at that time.
At this stage, you're a young married man. Melanie's at home. You had children at that stage? No problem.
Yes, no, we had the children. I tried phoning Clive, actually. But Clive, as he's wont, was in court, and so I couldn't get hold of him. And instead, I got hold of another barrister and said, look, phone the Chief Justice and say that I'm on my way to political detention. And as it turned out, it was an action by one of Mugabe's ministers, but not by Mugabe, And I was just being put in the car when a motorcycle group came, and there was a lot of talk, and then I was released. So I mercifully escaped that. But then the pressures were fairly strong after that. The secret police were outside the house the whole time, you know, quite openly, sitting there with the car with the big radio aerials, and they would follow you and tap your phone and things like that.
And you and your family had to get used to being monitored and watched by the secret police and by the government authorities.
Yes, yeah. But by then I was no longer representing these Air Force officers because I'd become a witness. And that actually increased problems because the pressure was on for you not to be there when the trial was there. And so, you know, I think they put the pressure on. And we spoke quite a lot with the British Embassy, and they were fantastic. And for example, in a sort of James Bondy way, they were able to intercept, and they called us in. Melanie, you remember getting a phone call saying, meet us at a park. Somebody will pick you up and he'll take you in. And when we went in, they said they were hatching a plot in Washington to try and be able to pull me in and my partner in as traitors. And they had been able to do things. So you suddenly found yourself in this kind of Kafkaesque sort of James Bondy world, if you can actually have the two together.
Were there any legal consequences for you for having held the press conference or handling the litigation in that way? Were you yourself in trouble with the police?
Yes, I was charged with contempt of court, and we went to the magistrate's court, and we were convicted, and then we appealed, and we won the appeal.
And this must have put a great pressure on your own sort of professional career as well as living in an atmosphere like that.
Well, yes, of course it did. You know, it's difficult to think about now. But I always said when I left Rhodesia that I wanted to have no regrets, and when I left, I had no regrets.
Any idea as to the fate of the men that you had been representing, but then...
Oh, no, that it all worked very well, because aside from the fact we didn't want them to be disappeared, the other critical thing was that they come to trial, because a lot of people in Zimbabwe simply didn't come to trial. You were picked up politically and you just rotted for years. And the trial was important because we knew it would attract publicity. We had a black judge called Dumbachena, and there's an old adage about the law, which is with judges, that clever is one thing, but honor is more important. And I still remember when he was first made a judge, a lot of people sort of said, well, he's not that clever, etc. And somebody said, don't worry about him, he's a gentleman. And a gentleman in the truest sense. And he had immense pressures on him, immense, from the government. And he acquitted all of them.
And they were released?
No, they were immediately detained politically. But there was so much political pressure at that time that eventually, after about 6 months, they were released. But to give you an idea of the political pressure, the doctor who'd come down with me...
Posing as your article clerk?
Posing as my article clerk, for reasons which needn't bother us now, was basically hounded out of the country. And his evidence was very important. And I gave my evidence at the trial as a witness, of course. And they said to me, he's not going to come back. He's terrified he's going to be assassinated. And so they sent me down. And that's another one of these things one remembers. Having a chat with him in his garden, and he had his wife and he had 3 young children. And he said, Mike, they're going to kill me.
If he returned?
If I return. And I said, well, I don't think they will. Everything will be done to make sure that you arrive straight to court, straight back again. And you won't be hit by any dissidents or anything. In fact, I had an earlier threat of a similar nature where there'd been a leak from Central Intelligence to my partner, who came around at about midnight and said, they're going to assassinate us. I remember calling Clive, and we sitting, this time I got him, but it was 2 in the morning, and the two of us sitting and discussing, you know, is this just a political maneuver? Because my partner had arranged for a cousin of his to pick us up at a farm and fly us out the country. You know, and I said, I'm not going to do it. And Clive agreed that this was a political pressure move. So these were not unknown. But the doctor had a long conversation with, and in the end had to just say to him, you know what, if they kill you, they kill you. What are you going to do? Stay here and regret the rest of your life that you didn't come back to give evidence and these men go to the gallows? And he went in and he spoke to his wife, and they sort of hugged each other, and there were some tears. And he came up, he gave evidence, he blew the whole thing away. He was a fantastic witness. Straight into a car, and off he went. So it was a very, very dramatic time. There's one thing which I often say, it happened in a very small way, but one of the people who was tortured and gave a statement, remember, Air Force officer, and he said to us, look at the punctuation in the first side of my statement, which was about that much. And he said, ignore the words and look at the punctuation, and you'll see there's only dots and dashes which are made commas. And when you looked at the punctuation only, the dots and the dashes were Morse code. And they said, I have been tortured, this is not a voluntary statement. Now, how a man has the presence of mind when he's under electrical torture to turn his punctuation into Morse code, incredible.
When you were in the car with the secret police, believing that you yourself were about to be detained, away from your wife, away from your children, did you have any idea how you would cope under such circumstances, how you would react to inevitable torture?
No, well, firstly, you're an optimist. You always think it's not going to happen in any event. It's not going to happen to me. I'm a lawyer. I'm just doing a lawyer's job. And I think when it does happen initially, you're all a bit, let me phone somebody. Let me see what I can do here, you know. And in fact, a lot of it is just standing up to the pressure. I mean, for me it was one thing, but for Melanie it was very different, and she was fantastic. And then, what made the difference was that I actually knew a lot of the people who were now putting the pressure on me. And so I was able, through various contacts, to go and speak to the people who count, which is the Central Committee, because it's basically a communist structure. And I can still remember sitting and talking to 3 or 4 of their members of the Central Committee, and them saying, look, it's gone beyond a court case, it's politics. And basically the agreement was reached, I could give evidence, but that I should leave, otherwise they'd deport me, on the basis that, having now become known for representing people opposing the government, I would continue to attract people like that, and that they didn't want. So Frank Stock, another member of the community, had been through Zimbabwe. He had said Hong Kong was a great place to go to. Clive, I know, was equally, and Ketty, concerned as to the way things were turning in Zimbabwe. We had tea together, and by the end of tea that afternoon we'd all decided to come to Hong Kong. And that was it.
And perhaps not surprising that in the early 80s that this was enough of an incident, and that you would be coming to Hong Kong. I just want to ask you, before we move on to Hong Kong, was there any element of religious persecution as well in Zimbabwe? You said it was political, but were you in any way intimidated or threatened as a result of being Jewish? Was that an issue?
No, there was nothing like that. I mean, they were very, very pro-Palestinian politically, but no, it was nothing like that. It was simply, you know, you shouldn't be doing this. You know, Zimbabwe no longer has a rule of law. It no longer has judges that are prepared to stand up. And it was the first inclination of that, the sort of the darkness of what it must have been like under Stalin or something like that, you know. And when one looks at history now and sees what's happened to the country, perhaps for both Clive and I, it was a fortuitous turn of events.
And how did it feel leaving Zimbabwe at that time? Was
Oh,
there
good.
Deep sorrow? No deep sorrow.
Very, yeah.
No looking out the window of the aeroplane and wishing you could go back.
No, we go back quite regularly. In fact, funnily enough, the person who prosecuted me, the actual prosecutor, when I say prosecuted me, who prosecuted the Air Force officers, and I was a witness and cross-examined me. The first time I was back, he telephoned me, and I thought, oh no. You get that sinking feeling. And he just said, Hong Kong, Mike, this is fantastic. Could you ship me some watches, and then we can do a deal? And I thought, the last thing I'm going to do is start getting into the shipping of watches to Zimbabwe, you know, with my ex-prosecutor.
So how big a change was life in Hong Kong, coming with your young family at that stage? Where were you living initially? How did you integrate yourself into society here?
It was very easy, because Hong Kong, with expatriates, puts a napkin on you and gives you a dummy, and then says, you know, you can take a few months to adjust. So we flew into a hotel.
You were not in private practice initially?
No, we weren't, because we were, Clive was the same, because we were Commonwealth qualified, we had no right to be admitted either as solicitors or barristers here, but could work for the Department of Justice, as it is now, the Attorney General's chambers. And they are very good, you know, they look after you, they help you get your children to school and things like that. And that was quite good, because in those days, when you left Zimbabwe, you were allowed to take $1,000 per family, and you could take furniture and effects, providing it was only one of each, or you know, they allowed you 6 chairs for a dining room suite, that sort of thing, and it was all 5 years old. So basically, you know, we arrived and started again, and Hong Kong's been very good to us.
Within about 7 years of arriving in Hong Kong and working for the Department of Justice, the Attorney General's chambers as was, you were then appointed as a judge to the district court. What made you decide to change direction and adopt a judicial career?
Well, I was going to go to the private bar, and you want the honest truth? Okay. You're sitting in the Attorney General's chambers, and little forms come around saying, there's a vacancy in the district court, and you think, yeah, I'll apply for that. Why not? and suddenly, yes, you've been. I was on holiday in Zimbabwe, funnily enough, and I was walking into a hotel, and somebody else, who I happen to know from here, saw me and said, "Congratulations, you've been made a district court judge." I felt a bit like the dog that had chased a rabbit and caught it and didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't. You know, I felt like saying, look, hang on a second, I only signed that because it was a boring afternoon in the Department of Justice. But the truth is that I've always enjoyed being a judge.
7 years after the district court, you were appointed to the High Court, so a big shift. Have you ever regretted your involvement as a judge? Have you been able to explore as many areas of the law that you have wanted to choose as a judge?
I've never regretted being a judge, never. I think some people never settle as judges, because remember, in the common law you're not trained as a judge as you are, say, in many European jurisdictions, civil jurisdictions. And so you either adjust to it or you don't, and some very brilliant barristers don't make good judges. For myself, I leave the assessments to everybody else. Obviously you have to, everybody does, but I've enjoyed it. And to be honest, I've enjoyed the ability to manage a courtroom yourself, to deal with people, because it's a service industry. You know, we might be dressed with a little pomp and splendor, pomposity. But the fact of the matter is that's necessary really to maintain respect for the institution. Because the institution doesn't work if it's not allowed to work, and respect is how it works. But that being said, you are a servant to the public, and you know, I've said on a number of occasions, it's a bit of a cliche I suppose, but in our courts, the cleaning lady is given equal respect to Li Ka-shing. And I like to think that that is in fact the case with judges who are worth their salt. Yeah.
You've managed to explore some fascinating areas of law. As a High Court judge, you were working on a number of judicial review cases which made the headlines. As a Court of Appeal judge from 2008, when you were appointed to the Court of Appeal, you worked on some of the leading cases which have changed and affected Hong Kong law. And last year, in the Court of Final Appeal, when you were appointed, you've really changed with some of your judgments, some of the major areas of Hong Kong matrimonial law, civil law. Are you aware at the time that you're handling these cases that you are playing a pivotal role in legal development in Hong Kong?
No. I think when I say no, it's a qualified no, because obviously if a case has got a lot of publicity and you know it's touching a raw nerve, or you know it has importance, then obviously you'd be very myopic not to realize that. But common law lawyers and judges sort of work with the problem, and you just work with the problem. I don't think you sit down to say with a judgment, this is going to be a great judgment dealing with matters of great importance. You sit down to answer the problem that's put before you, even though you may realize to an extent, of course, that it may have ramifications. I mean, certain matters, for example, like I did a judgment on discrimination in our criminal system on charges against homosexuals. And to me it was, you know, at the time when I did it, it was a bit of a no-brainer. You know, it was quite clear the laws were discriminatory. They were a hangover from the 50s and the 60s. And I really didn't think too much of it. And then I was quite surprised that it gleaned such a lot of publicity and concern in parts of the community. So you certainly don't try and anticipate the way the public's going to think.
And being in Hong Kong, a nice, safe environment, presumably you could finally sigh with relief that you weren't going to get into trouble with the police anymore, or fear any more arrests, any untoward event. Is that right? Have you managed to keep out of trouble since you've been in Hong Kong?
No. This is Clive again, I'm sure. I was arrested, yes. We went to Stanley Market one day, and it was a hot day, and I was wearing shorts, and I tend to always give my wallet to Melanie.
Good man.
Yeah, yes, exactly. No, not so she can use it, so she can carry it. And we came back, and she took our son to the hairdresser, and I said, I'll go and pick my daughter up, or something like that. And of course, I was waiting for my daughter, and I parked on a yellow line, or something like that. And a policeman came over and said, I want to see your ID card. And I said, oh, it's in my wallet. And my wallet's with my wife. Ah, yes, likely story. What about your driving license? I said, well, that's with my ID card. And so he said, right, we must go now to the police station. I said, hang on, I'm waiting for my daughter. I'm not going to leave my daughter. And so he said, okay, we'll wait for the daughter. And she came down and sat in the back. And then he said, you can drive us to the police station. I said, but hang on, you don't know if I've got a driving license, you know, because he said, oh, that's all right, don't worry. So I drove this police officer who had arrested me to the police station, which was down by the waterfront. And then he said, you've got one phone call. I thought, oh no, this is like an American movie. And literally, I phoned Mel. Mel was at that stage coming out of the old Hilton Hotel and was waiting for me, wondering where I was, where the very big Sikh, you know, very grand, strong man, he came out and said to Melanie, you've got a phone call. Melanie thought she was on one of those candid camera things. she came through, and it was me using my one phone call, you see, saying, can you come to the Waterfront police station? And once I'd made the call, the sergeant said, is that okay? I said, oh no, fine, thank you very much. And I was not going to say I was involved with the law in any way whatsoever. I was with the Department of Justice at that time, because I thought, that's just compounding any problems you're in. And he led me to a cell. And he put me in a cell. So I sat in the cell with a drug addict who was going through withdrawal. And then Melanie arrived. Robin was sitting outside, and the kids came through and said, hi, Dad. And I said, hello, children, how are you? Do not do this when you grow up. And the amazing thing was that the man who had arrested me, I got a caution of discharge, I'm happy to say, later. The man who had arrested me, the following week I was in court, and he was one of the police officers in the team bringing in all the exhibits. And so we were able to have a bit of fun with each other.
He was surprised.
Yes, he was surprised, I was too. Yes.
Now, if it hadn't been the law, it could just as easily have been in the arts, with you perhaps pursuing a career as an author. You're a published author with some 6 novels to your name?
8.
8 novels.
I hasten to add, yeah.
And one of the novels that you wrote in 1975, a novel called A Game for Vultures, was subsequently turned into a big Hollywood movie. Now, that must have created great excitement.
Well, you're right, other than it wasn't big. And I don't know that strictly it was Hollywood, but it was a movie.
It had Richard Harris, it had the Shaft actor Richard Roundtree, it had Denham Elliott, and the lovely Joan Collins, so that's quite a cast list, actually.
Yeah. Yes, it was a terrible film. I'm happy to say. No, really.
The book was much better.
The book was a lot better. They buy the rights off you, and then you have no say in it whatsoever. They don't want. They sent me a copy of the script, and you could just look at the script and think, this is unreadable. I only wrote Skit and Donna, Blood and Thunder books, adventures.
Based on your experience in Zimbabwe, in the bush, and fighting generally?
The first book, and I suppose the second 2 were obviously, the first was about Rhodesia anyway, about breaking sanctions, and the plot was Rhodesia needed more helicopters. And where were they going to get helicopters? And they had to break them down, and they had to ship them, and the freedom fighters were trying to stop them. So it's that sort of thing. So yes, your knowledge of weaponry and things like that, which you get rammed down your throat with compulsory military service, helped. And so I wrote 4, but they were all in Africa, then another 4 when I came here.
All this sort of high drama and war story, but we know that every good war story requires a bit of romance. So were you any good at introducing a bit of romance?
There was, yes. I had a very good editor, and I still remember with Game for Vultures. He was very amusing, and I had thought I've got to put some sex in,
Sure.
the normal scene between the sort of the hero and his girlfriend and all the rest of it. And I remember getting, they didn't have emails in those days, but I remember getting a letter from him, basically saying, look, I've edited out those 2 sex scenes. In future, stick to something you know about.
Not at all true, Melanie. Not at all true.
That was, didn't live that down for a long time.
You've lived in Hong Kong now for a very long time. You've established your career here. How important has the Jewish community in Hong Kong become to you and to your family?
Well, it was always important, but perhaps not so much many years ago. And if you ask me why it's become more important as the years have gone by, I can't tell you, but it has. And it's for me, it's an honour to be able to assist the community in any way I can, and I mean that. It's an honour.
Are you somebody who is able to mix among the main congregations easily, and do you have contacts within the all three main congregations?
I think when you've been here a long time, you know, and now 27 years or so, I think Clive and I and Ketty and Melanie have been here, you obviously get to know people, you know, in every community. I wish I knew more people than I do, and I'd like to, over the years, get to know more. But it's a fantastic community, you know. It's tremendous characters. Everybody you meet has an interesting story. Okay, I'm talking about one of them, namely my own. But I'm sure that those stories are overshadowed by a great many other stories that other people have to say, and who are members of this community from every corner of the world.
And from a judicial point of view, as well as from a Jewish and now Jewish trustee point of view, can you imagine Hong Kong remaining your home for years to come? Is this where you're comfortable about being?
Oh yeah, no, we intend this to be our home for the foreseeable future. When the problem with joining government is they put you in a gilded cage, they give you a nice apartment, and so you don't go out and buy one. And I think of all those years from 1983, and I think about it, you know, now when you look back and think, if we'd gone out and just bought something for $500,000, you know, would I be rich? You know, it'd be unbelievable. And of course you don't. You wait until 3 years ago when the market's at a peak. And then you go out and look for a sort of, 500 square feet in Wan Chai, or wherever. You know, you don't, you know, I'm being a bit supercilious, and I don't mean to be, so forgive me. I'm just saying that we didn't think of buying many years ago when common sense dictated we should have done, but we have now. And Hong Kong's our home. Absolutely.
And that's good news for us. And Michael, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll allow a couple of questions if there are. Is it all right with you, Mike? A couple of questions. Ladies and gentlemen, are there any questions or observations? Mr. Graceman, you featured large in this story. Yes.
Yes. What happens to your parents? They were still in Rhodesia in those days when you left? Or?
Yes. They both stayed in Rhodesia. Yeah. They were much older. No, there was no problem for them. There's still many people. Melanie's mother is still there. The community is very small. We were back a while ago. You go to Shul on a Saturday, 2 communities, but together they can't get a minyan. Now it's a shame. It's a dying community. But that happens, of course.
Yes, but it's not a safe place to be still, though, is it, Zimbabwe?
Depends what you get yourself involved in, I think.
Mike.
What took you back? Why would you go back to such an unhappy place?
We had a number of friends there, and I think most importantly, initially, of course, my parents were there, and Melanie's parents were there. So it was a case of going back to see family. And again, it's a small country. It's a bit like Hong Kong in that sense. And through various people, I was able to get an assurance that I wouldn't be arrested if I went back or picked up or harassed in any way. And having received that assurance, at that time I thought I could rely on them. We've been back and we've had no problems. And in fact, you know, the people, it's like everywhere, I suppose. The people are delightful and they know exactly what's going on. And you see the problems they've been through, the days of hyperinflation, for example. I have notes that go in 18 months, banknotes, from $1,000 staying the same value to 10 trillion. And you look at a $10 trillion banknote. in 18 months, you know, and until people, and Melanie will confirm, they were throwing their money into the ditches. You would see banknotes littering the ditches because they were just worthless. And the currency's now died and has been replaced by the US dollar. Yeah.
Mark.
Mike, you talked a lot about, it's been fascinating, frankly, but what about China? About China in terms of a general relationship or specific relationship, perhaps with judges and so on? What kind of impact has that had on you beyond Hong Kong? Because China obviously needs a little assistance in the area, which you're an expert.
I wish I was an expert, but I'm not. But we've been up to China. The non-Chinese judges have had courses at Tsinghua University in Beijing to learn something about the systems. And I'm very optimistic, actually, because the Chinese judges who we speak to and the Chinese lawyers we speak to are very well aware of the deficiencies in their system. And that's lesson number one, is know what the problem is. And lesson number two is how to fix it, and I think they are fixing it. I'm fairly pro in that sense. I think that 10 years from now, I think their legal system will be transformed. Yeah. But I say that as no expert. That's just optimism, perhaps.
Ladies and gentlemen, any further questions? Mike, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us. Please stay and relax and have a drink and have a chat.